Hi, it's Lyndon, and I want to have a rant about major scales and how important they are. Just get this off my chest because it is going to help you absolutely get better at the saxophone, no question whatsoever. If you understand the phenomenal importance of major scales and why we bother working on them. Before I do that, if you're finding these videos useful, then please consider buying me a coffee. That gives me a huge amount of motivation and a large amount of happiness. So why do we bother playing major scales or practicing major scales? Or what's the story with major scales? I think in the olden days, the story used to be, you know, the teacher would say to the student, learn your major scales, and which is, by the way, the right thing to do. And the student would say, oh, okay, but why? And the teacher would say, why? You're not here to ask why. Don't ask questions. Just play the major scale and don't play any bad notes or I'm going to hit you with this ruler on the hand. So I think that's absolutely terrible, because I'm here to let you know that major scales are the most relevant, beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous things that a musician can possibly have. So let's explore some of the reasons why we bother practicing major scales. So one of the reasons is that if you understand major scales, let me put this a different way. When you talk about other types of scales like minor scales, or I recently did a video on harmonic minors and we talked about flattening the third and flattening the sixth. And that is a bit of a weird statement, because flattening it compared to what? So anytime you talk about flattening a note or sharpening a note or changing a note, that's a comparative statement, and what you're comparing it to tends to be left out of that statement. So it can be quite confusing. If you're trying to flatten the third and the seventh, you don't know what am I doing here? So major scales are the golden scale that everything else is measured against. So if you take a major scale and flatten the third and flatten the seventh, you'll get a Dorian minor. If you flatten the third and flatten the sixth, you'll get a harmonic minor compared to a major scale. So in that way, whenever we're talking about adjusting the notes of a scale, we're always comparing it to a major scale. So if you understand your major scale, then you know exactly what to do. You have the recipe and you can do that immediately, which is a good thing. Another really significant factor is that melodies, the tunes that you love, the melodies are made up of major scales. They're made up of the bunch of notes in a major scale, but rearranged. And there's countless examples, like, as you can see, I haven't got my saxophone on my person, but Somewhere Over the Rainbow is somewhere over the rainbow. It's going up and down the major scale. Or Fly Me to the Moon is a descending major scale. Or Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire is a song that starts on the root, goes to the root, comes down the scale. So the tunes that we love are built out of the scales that we're sometimes reluctant to play or can't really see what the point of them is. So that's another really huge factor, that melodies are built out of the bunch of notes that a major scale would contain. Another reason is that if you start a major scale on a different point, not the root, then you get something called a mode, and this is just a whole new world of possibilities. In fact, every major scale has 7 modes, and if you're not too sure about this, have a look in some of my previous videos where I talk about modes. I've got a tutorial on modes to help you understand that, and I'll remember to put a link down in the description to modes. So modes are major scales starting on a different note. But if you don't know the major scale, you can't possibly know the second mode of a major scale. You can't know the second mode of a scale that you don't know what it is, right? So that is another reason that all of the modes come out of major scales, and modes are used to build up more complex and interesting and beautiful musical harmonic structures, like 2-5-1s. Major 2-5-1s are built out of the modes of a major scale. So if you don't know the major scale, you can't work out the modes. So that's another really significant reason why we would work on our scales. If you'd like to be able to improvise through a tune, what notes where do I get my notes from? The major scale. The major scale, the bunch of notes contained within the major scale, are a really good starting place to throw around so that you can get some different sounds and tell kind of musical stories while you're improvising. And make these lovely shapes and motifs and repeating ideas using the notes of a major scale. So if you don't know the major scale, then you don't know what the notes of the key that you're in are, and you can't do that. Whereas if you do know them, then you can. You've got much more of a chance, and you can make patterns out of these notes, which is another thing I'm going to make a video about. I've made a video about patterns in major scales before, when I was doing things in a less gorgeous way. Now I've got my beautiful plant and my lovely IKEA. It's not from IKEA actually, it was from eBay, second hand, can you believe it? My beautiful shelving unit says, learn your scales. Very, very important. Also, if you know the chord tones of your scale, your major scale, the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh and the ninth, then this is going to be massively significant when you come to understand melodies. If you're trying to transcribe a melody, which means listening to it and writing it down, or listening to it and copying it, then if you know your chord tones and your scale tones, that is going to be so much easier. And if you don't know that, it's going to be, if you don't know your major scales, then it's going to be really difficult, if not impossible. You'll be just wondering why this is so incredibly difficult. But it doesn't have to be that way. And if you know all of your major scales, you know, the notes of a major scale are the same as being in a particular key. So if you're talking about C major, you're in the key of C major, you know the notes. So there are 12 of these fabulous major scales, all of which I've made videos about, so do go and have a look if you don't have them down. That will empower you to be able to play in any key. If you have all 12 major scales, that means that you can play in any key to some extent. I can't tell you how important these major scales are, and the longer I play the saxophone and I'm involved in music and helping other people to learn music, the more it comes home to me how important these are. Personally, I'm self-taught, and I realised one day when I've been playing for about 4 years, I still didn't have my major scales down, and so I made it a mission to get all of my major scales really, really down. It did take a long time, and it took me a long time because I didn't understand the significance, because once I'd got my major scales, it just made it didn't make things twice as easy. It didn't make things 5 times as easy. It made things like 50 times easier on the saxophone. Everything came so much more easily if I had my 12 major scales down. Before that, I was playing in bands and I'd be fine up to a point, and then they'd hit a section where we changed key and I wasn't 100% or even 50% sure of what the notes of that key was, and I was lost. All of a sudden I couldn't play. I had all these lovely ideas in my mind, but I couldn't get them out my sax because I didn't know the scale that they were in. I didn't know what key they were in. I wasn't familiar with my scales. So now I'm like an ex-smoker or something. I'm like, you know, yeah, I'm like somebody who's given up smoking, and I'm ranting to all the smokers in the world. You've got to quit. You know, it's really true. You've got to learn your major scales, and there's different levels of knowing them. Just being able to play them while reading them off a sheet, that's a good start. Being able to play them by ear is significantly better if you can do that, and that's really what you're aiming for. If you can hit the chord tones, so the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh and the ninth, that's better still. And if you can improvise using these major scales, that's really good as well. So just I can talk to you about and show you how to do that. Very, very simple ideas, making patterns in your scales. Also, you can practice your major scales even when you don't have the instrument in your hand, because what you can do is that you can test yourself and become familiar with which scales have which sharps or flats. For example, we know that C has no sharps and no flats on it, flats in it, I should say. Whereas G has one sharp, and what is that sharp? It's F sharp. So knowing that, having that knowledge is really, really, really good. What about F? On the other side of the cycle of fifths, right? How many sharps or flats does it have? It has one, it has B flat. So this is something that I'm asking my clients. I'm indicating towards this area because that's my music going through there. Can you tell me how many sharps or flats does E have in it? And if they immediately say 4 and they know which those sharps are, that's a really good indicator. Or sometimes they go, oh, hang on a minute, I know this. Hang on, I do know this. Now wait a minute, is it 2? No. Is it 3? No. Is it 5? then that's a different level. And it doesn't make them mad, bad or sad. It just means that they're not 100% sure of how many sharps or flats in that particular scale. So the likelihood is that if they had to play that scale, they wouldn't be so fluid in it because they're not 100% sure of what the notes are. I could rant about major scales and the incredible significance of them all day, as you can see. But it is the best piece of advice that any music teacher, and it's the best piece of advice that I could share with you, is learn your major scales, get your major scales down. It's really, really phenomenally important to make your life so much easier when you're playing the saxophone. Like I said, it won't be twice as easy, it will be like 50 times easier if you know your scales. So you should really focus your efforts on there. Once again, thank you so much. I do hope that this is useful to you. If it is, do buy me a coffee because that just makes me smile hugely. So you'd be helping out a lot. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, thoughts, if you need support or help or advice, if you've got any ideas about stuff that you'd like me to make videos about, then do let me know, and please like and subscribe. Have a beautiful day. Take care. Bye.